Here we are at Zoomtopia 2023, and I'm in the expo hall on the Theta Lake stand with Anthony Cresci. How's it going, Anthony?
I'm doing very well, thank you.
Great to see you. And someone told me that you won an award last night.
We did. We won Zoom Platform ISV Partner of the Year.
Congratulations, fantastic. Well, what does that mean for Theta Lake, and how do you work with Zoom?
Yeah, so we've been partnered with Zoom since 2018. We're also a Zoom venture portfolio company. We've had a long-standing relationship, and it's really around the value that we provide to customers. So our compliance and security integrations are critical to organizations adopting the Zoom suite of communications and remaining compliant. And that's the value that they saw and the reason we won the award.
Fantastic. And I know compliance is the gift that just keeps on giving, really, in terms of conversation. I know there's lots of challenges out there right now. Tell us what's facing most of your customers right now and the kinds of conversations that you're having.
Yeah, so let's start with the headlines. And you've probably seen it out there. There's been $2.5 billion in fines levied against financial institutions. And there's a couple of misnomers around that. First is, when you saw the fines and you see the headlines, a lot talked about WhatsApp. Well, that was just one of the channels. It's actually around the record keeping of those communications. So the fact that the organizations didn't have the business communications from their employees and they couldn't reproduce them to regulators when they were asked about them. So it's really around that gap in record keeping. And then the second is that it started with the top financial institutions, but it's actually levied to a lot of other ones, investment managers, asset managers, private equity, hedge funds, so the mid-market aspects of it. So it's not just applying to the top banks, it's everyone associated with that. And it's really around just a gap in record keeping. And if you listen to the rhetoric and the communication from the regulators, they're talking a lot about if you don't have the right compliance coverage and you don't have the right record keeping and supervision in place, you do so at your own peril, meaning that there's going to be more fines and penalties associated to those that don't have the right controls in place. And so that's a lot of the challenges we're actually solving is how do we have the full suite of integrations, meaning integrations into Zoom meetings, Zoom webinars, Zoom team chat, Zoom phone SMS, in-meeting chat, polling, Q&A, whiteboard will be coming up as well, so that you can capture the full fidelity of those communications, making sure organizations are compliant with those record-keeping requirements.
Thanks for explaining that. In terms of product, how do you solve these problems? How do you fill these gaps in for your customers?
Yeah, so it really first starts with the integrations, right? So certified API integrations into the underlying platform. I mentioned we've been partnering with Zoom since 2018. We have the most certified integrations across the entire Zoom suite. So it starts with there. And you really need to be baked into the fabric of the underlying platforms. Having these integrations is super important and start with that capture layer. One, that you capture all of the communications. We talk about a Zoom team chat, for example. It's not just the messages you're capturing, it's the emojis, the GIFs, the reactions, edits, deletes. All of that content needs to be a part of those records, otherwise there's a gap. The second part of it is doing things around reconciliation. How do I know the number of records that were created inside of Zoom is the number of records that were captured and archived in the system? And being able to have a report to report that to the regulators that you do in fact have the full records of those communications. And then by being integrated into the fabric of the APIs, you can then do things around remediation. You send something that's a confidential document, sensitive information. You don't want it leaked further inside the organization. Well, how do I go back in and delete that out of a channel so that it's not exposed to more users inside the organization? And so it's critical to be a part of that, embedded into that fabric and those APIs, and then it's capturing all the content. You can't just be a vendor that captures only voice or only e-coms. You need to do it across the full suite of the portfolio, otherwise it's a point solution, and then an organization needs to find multiple vendors to solve one problem.
And as we've seen from Zoom, it's an ever-expanding portfolio. The contact center is now very well established, got a lot of features in there. Expanded channels. Here at Zoomtopia, they announced WhatsApp and Messenger. How do you handle that contact center world?
Yeah, so we also just announced an integration to Zoom Contact Center. That encompasses all the things I just talked about, from meetings to webinar to phone. Now we have contact center support, and there's a couple interesting things about that. The contact center use cases comes up in one, being able to capture the recordings that are being creative, and that's voice, video, e-coms, all of those different aspects of it. And then there's also things that we can do around PCI redaction. if there's credit card information that's captured in these recordings and you still want to store them so that supervisors can review agent calls, you can redact that PCI information out of the recording, and then you can also do analysis for the supervisors to identify conversations that are interesting for them to then do more further analysis on, to do further training and the likes of it. And how we tie all that together, which is super important, is something that we call unified conversation replay. So another challenge that's faced a lot of regulated organizations is, and I talked about those point solutions, I've got my e-coms in one place, I've got my voice conversations in another place, I've got my video in another place. Well, if I want to find a conversation between Anthony and Rob over the past month, and we've been on Zoom meetings, Zoom phones, Zoom contact center, how do I do that if I'm pulling that from disparate places? Instead, if it's all coming in Theta Lake, we can show a unified conversation replay where we went from a meeting to a phone SMS to an email, back into a Zoom contact center recording, and you have that full threaded history in one single place. Creates tons of efficiencies and efficacy and when you're doing review and investigations on that content.
That's really interesting. And I imagine not every organization is going to have the full Zoom experience, for example. So
Right.
what happens when an organization might have Zoom meetings or Zoom phone, but they don't have their contact center or something else, with Zoom?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things. One, you kind of pick and choose what's relevant to you inside the Zoom platform, the suite of communications. But we have over 100 certified integrations. So if you have a heterogeneous environment where you've got Zoom for meetings and you've got Microsoft Teams for chat and you've got something else for voice, for Central, we can bring all those together. And that's why that unified conversation replay is so powerful, and all of our integrations that support that is we can bring all these different channels into one place, all the integrations that we leverage into one environment, and that creates those efficiencies to have complete compliance coverage for an organization regardless of the channels or the platforms that they utilize in their environment.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. And in terms of AI, should we be worried? I mean, should organizations be worried about AI? Because it's going to create a lot more data as organizations implement AI based technologies. What's that going to do from a compliance point of view?
Yeah, so you're exactly right. It's going to create a ton more data, right? And we've seen this, and it's top of mind for a lot of organizations. I know Zoom, it's a big focus for them in driving these things. And I think you'll see a lot more organizations that have been interested in this. How do I get my users starting to use all these capabilities? Because it drives a lot more productivity, better end user experiences. But in the world of finance and a lot of the other regulated organizations, if you don't have compliance controls around it, you can't adopt it. And so that's one of the things that we've been partnering with Zoom on is how do you make sure that you've got the right compliance controls in place when you're using AI? And so, for example, Zoom AI Companion, it creates things like meeting summaries. How do we capture that content? How does it be part of a record inside of our platform? Same thing with it's generating more content inside of Zoom Team Chat. Those could all be captured through our API integrations. And then there's ways inside of our place, which we've talked about, because we can do more efficient and effective e-discovery or search across these records, because we can also do proactive compliance, risk detection, surveillance of those communications. You can also leverage AI to identify the conversations within the communications that are relevant for secondary review, so you're not just doing manual review on the content.
It sounds like a very complex subject, compliance, but thank you for explaining that. It's really, really clear. In terms of the ever-evolving industry that you're in, compliance and obviously the contact center and UC industry.
Yep.
How are you going to continue to adapt and evolve Theta Lake going forward?
Yeah, so the unified conversation replay, which I'll go back to, is super powerful, right? And it really stems from all of our certified API integrations that we have with our partners. How do we capture more and more communications? And that's one of the challenges that organizations are facing. Zoom, for example, it's not one single mode. There's so many things in that suite of communications. And then as we just talked about, there's other platforms that organizations are using. So we see on average 5 to 7 platforms inside of each organization. And some of our biggest enterprises, it's over 100. And so that challenge is super big and complex of being able to leverage a vendor like ourselves to capture all the communications, because that record keeping requirement is fundamental into making sure that they're not getting fined or penalized anymore. So you'll see us continue to do that. We've also released our own API. So if there's homegrown solutions, you can send content into our environment, So it's giving organizations another way to solve that challenge. And then we've also done a lot of innovation around, bring your own keys, bring your own storage. So we're a cloud-based solution, but now we can enable organizations to bring their own storage into the environment and Theta Lake to sit on side of it. So another way for organizations to choose how they want to deploy us, whether it's leveraging existing compliance or infrastructure, or whether it's bringing their own storage inside their environments. And then we'll continue to support more and more channels and modalities.
That's great. And thank you so much for talking to me today. Congratulations once again on your award. Enjoy the rest of the show.
Appreciate it. Thanks, Rob.